I want to sort of dive right in. First of all, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Ralph, for being here and joining us with this book, Fake President. You know, my main question is when you say that he still goes on to be fairly popular. I mean, over 45% of people think that he's doing a good job or he's someone they would vote for again. What do you think is his what makes him who he is? Why does he continue to be popular?
His popularity, I miscalculated. I wasn't alone. I always thought there was a fringe fourth in this country, like there is in Western European countries with Le Pen or Enoch Powell a couple of decades ago. A fringe fourth who won't say they're racists. You know, in this country, it's okay to be a racist, but you can't call someone a racist. But the data shows that about a fourth of the population, white population, get a little racially tense. Trump has, if you take out the Rasmussen poll, really is at 41, 42% favorable. It's the lowest of any modern president. It doesn't mean he won't get reelected. But he's more popular than I would have ever thought. Why? In 2016, a lot of things happened, and Ralph and I actually agree and disagree in part about how this came about. I myself had not anticipated that Anthony Weiner's laptop would decide the election. With a week to go and Comey's pursuit to go, it tipped the numbers slightly, but there were bigger things at play. There's a book, Dangerous States, another book, Righteous Minds by Jonathan Haidt, which explore the psychology of people, and over decades, people have gotten to despise elites who tell them that that their problems are their fault. People are anxious economically, anxious racially, and here comes along a guy with some talents, but more. I was walking my dog, a sentence I never thought I'd say in front of you, Ralph, in New York City a couple of weeks ago, and a woman was walking her dogs get intertwined. I hear her accent. I said, "Where are you from?" She goes, "Australia." So I say, "Gee, what do people in Australia think of Donald Trump?" And she said, "We can't understand how the greatest country on earth is led by the worst person on earth." And I thought, that sort of says it. And while Trump was lawfully selected as president, that's true, he's still a fake president because his instability, lack of intelligence, lack of integrity, and dissembling mean he can't do the job. I mean, we could ask a smart surgeon to be an opera singer. It's not going to happen. And in fact, and let me conclude with this and then we'll have an exchange. By fake, we mean he spends so much time golfing, tweeting, foxing, seething, that he didn't get around to appointing 1/3 of the inspector generals. So many of the cabinet are quote unquote acting cabinet members because he doesn't care about the details of the job, he just cares about, given his performance history, the appearance of doing the job. And so at this point, we're down to impeachment, re-election, or realignment to get to the end of the story. And Ralph and I, all of us, are trying to contribute what we can in terms of elbow grease, volunteering, running, grassroots organizing. And we wanted to put together one book that couldn't have everything in it because his volume is unprecedented. But we organized it by a content with explainers for each lie and scandal So it can be a reference for you with the crazy uncle, or to bolster your friends, neighbors, and families. As we enter an epical year, we're going to know a lot more, and we hope that this book is educational, because while it's stipulated he's a lying, corrupt racist, he's also unsuited to be president, which requires reason, law, and facts. And everything he does, however, is none of those three. It's all vanity, money, and family, his own. And that's not what we elect presidents to do.
So there's over 200 pages here in this book of you've outlined lots of the stories, the lies, and it's done in a really humorous way, I have to say. It's a fun read. I recommend it highly for anyone. But you know, you also, in your epilogue, you talk about what is the reason why he continues to be in power. And you outline the billionaires that are benefiting from his policies, and a very strong media backing through Fox News and others. Can you speak a little bit more about what is it about him that they love, other than the fact, I mean, almost every president that's been around has backed the billionaires. It's not like he's the first or he won't be the last. But what is it about him that they feel so attached to that they don't want to let go, even out of fear that they may even lose the party or lose the credibility of the party? They continue to hang on to him. What is it about him? It almost feels like he has something over them. Like they're I don't know, it seems like an odd sort of confluence of different interests coming together. Here's the microphone.
Well, Andy, it's because your assumption is that all votes are up for the taking. Most people vote Republican or Democrat because their parents and grandparents voted Republican or Democrat. Doesn't matter what issues, what the person is, they just vote the party. What you're fighting for is 25% of a fluid vote. And so he begins with, large percentage of people are going to vote for anybody. Then when you get down to people who might vote for Democrat, Republican, they haven't made up their mind, my quibble with those voters is they don't do their homework. They make up their mind in 5 minutes. I like what he says. I like his slogan. I like who he's against. So he got a lot of votes because they hated Hillary. They didn't want to vote for Hillary. You're down to 2 votes, 2 people. They don't consider the Greens or Libertarians. So he got a good margin of votes, some of whom voted for Obama, and they voted for Trump because they couldn't stand Hillary, warmonger, Wall Street, etc. Then you get what I address in the epilogue. The epilogue is addressed to the Trump voters. How about that for a challenge? And the word is betrayal. That he betrayed them on the various issues that he said he was going to fight for them. Manufacturing jobs are down. The plants are not coming back to America. The trade war, if anything, is costing jobs in China, etc. The second thing he said, that the drug companies are getting away with murder. Well, they're still getting away with it. He hasn't done anything about drug prices. He's been dragging his feet, and he betrayed them there. He betrayed them in terms of foreign policy. He said these endless wars, which he still talks about. He's in all the countries Obama and Bush are in. He's fighting 9 wars in 9 countries without congressional declaration, often without congressional appropriation, unconstitutional. And he's all over the place. He's basically betrayed them on that basis. But what was interesting is how low their expectations were. And that's the problem I have with all voters. If your expectations are low as to what the president should be doing for, to, of, by you in the White House, you're easy manipulation fodder. You can be controlled. If you're a single issue voter, you can be controlled. If you're a multi-issue voter, it's very hard for them to game you, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. So number one, the Reagan blue-collar voters, which Trump appealed to, didn't make any demands on them for living wage. Well, most of them were not minimum wage workers. A lot of them were union. 1/3 of all union voted for Trump. They're not worried about the minimum wage. They didn't demand universal health care because they had universal health care for them, the unions. Above all, they didn't demand labor law reform, so the tens of millions of workers who tell the pollsters they would like a union, like Walmart people and so on, they didn't make any demands on them. Because basically, and let's put it on the back of the voters here. I'm not one to flatter voters. When I campaigned for president, I did not flatter voters. In fact, I told them, if you ever see a politician who doesn't flatter voters, you're seeing a visiting Martian. Then I have to exempt myself. Because you can talk about Wall Street, you can talk about corrupt politicians, you can talk about Trump. Who made it all possible? People don't spend enough time civically engaged, they don't spend enough time learning about the record of the voters, of the candidates, in contrast to their rhetoric, which is overwhelmingly the face of too many of these politicians. So we come to this book. This book is the homework. It's easy to take, it's very accurate. Mark once did a book, Reagan's Reign of Error, and it's a fraction of the size of this book because it's a fraction of the global serial prevaricator that Trump has been. Over 14,000 prevarications, according to the Washington Post. He's now down to about 21 a day. I just heard him give a speech, and it took 8 minutes of my time. He made 7 lies. Like, under Obama, he gave Iran $130 billion. Totally false. So you say to the Trump voter, would you work with someone, would you have a neighbor that you were friendly with if they were chronic liars by the hour? Of course not. Well, why do you do it? Why do you vote for Trump? Why are you still with Trump? Well, I like what he says. And
But Ralph, isn't there an assumption, I think, for a lot of people that politicians lie anyway?
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
that going, so that it's like, okay, so he's
yeah,
lying.
but that's not an excuse.
Yeah, but-
because
but-
they know, Andy, that no politician lies by the hour. See? So they know that.
Well,
Because they get his tweets and they watch him. So the other thing you say to the Trump voter is, would you have a neighbor or co-worker who is a sexual predator, a serial sexual predator? Most of them would say no. A bigot, racist, and he follows through with the policies, stripping Medicare, stripping food stamps, housing, and so on. So here's the disconnect. They would never associate with anybody or do any business with anybody who had Trump's traits. Recidivist, serial, regular traits. He violates 7 out of the 10 commandments as a way of life. Take that, evangelicals. Okay? So you say to them, why do you keep supporting him? Okay, it was encapsulated by a 52-year-old worker who moved from Ohio to Georgia, and he was asked by a reporter, why are you still supporting Trump? You just lost your job in a plant he said he was going to save. Here's what he said. Just think of the expectation level here and think of the subtext. Quote, they all say he's crazy, but he's saying what I'm thinking. Does that mean I'm crazy? So they bond their ego, their prejudices, their hatred of Hillary or the Democrats. They bond with him, which is why it's so hard to change their mind. So the way you change their mind is you basically ask them, what did Trump do for you? And then you decode it. So what do they say? Kept out the immigrants? What is he going to say? So you get it down to where they live, work, and raise their family. That's where you win elections. That's where you win arguments. That's when the generalities, the abstractions, red state, blue state, conservative, liberal, start dissipating. Because when you get down to where they work, live, and raise their family, they have a convergence with anybody. They all bleed the same way when the corporations steal from them. They all breathe the corporations' poisons in the air and the water. They all see how the corporations get away with minimal taxation, and suddenly they're told by the politicians that they can't repair the bridges or upgrade their children's schools or set up community health clinics. So that's what this book does. It decodes in a way that Mark does that no one else really can do so brilliantly. You'll see what I mean. He even has sections here where you can put notes, you see? And then it closes the argument by addressing the Trump voters. Yeah, there are obviously Trump voters who are Republicans forever. You're not going to touch them. It's a legacy vote. There are Trump voters who can't bear the fact they were wrong about it. They bond their egos so tightly. But what do you need, as Mark said? You spin off 15, 20% of them, and you have a landslide election in the congressional districts and the nation. If I may end on this note, the problem with our side is we're attached to a political force that goes for the capillaries, while the other side goes for the jugular. So you have a book by Donald Trump Jr., and the other side buys thousands and thousands of copies in the last 3 weeks. It's the #1 bestseller. Where's our group? Where's our side? So it's always good when you're losing to first look in the mirror and then get others to look in the mirror, because that's where it starts. Now here we have Medea Benjamin of Code Pink, and I hope she's going to make a major impact this week on these impeachment hearings, because they're rushing to get them out before Christmas, to vote them next week. They're too narrow, they're not broad enough, and this book tells you why. That if you let them get away with 7 or 8 major violations of the Constitution, because they're not part of the articles that are going to be voted on, he will say that Nancy Pelosi had the majority vote, and she had all these charges of my violating the Constitution, and she didn't put it to a vote, and don't you know why? And it's because they're all lies, and they're all fake, and I've done nothing wrong. So they come with a narrow band of impeachment offenses, they pass them through the House, and they give them to burial in the Republican Senate, which is not required to defend all these indefensible things that he's done that can be clustered in one impeachable offense after another. And we have a handout. Anybody wants to come up afterwards when you get the book, we have a handout describing this in the form of a letter to Nancy Pelosi, plus the impeachable offenses.
But the epilogue was entirely Ralph's, because he has a vision of how to connect to people. And when you were talking about their ego interfaces with his, and it's hard, you have to go where people live, I'm thinking to myself, wait, is that right? You know, you should run for president sometime. It's an idea. I mean, I don't want to, push you too hard on that. 2 numbers. First, raise your hand if in your life, to the best that you remember it, you've never lied or fibbed. Aha! You're like Trump. No, the woman that's turning around. You're like Trump. You're both liars. Now, volume counts. And so if a lie is a brick, and you lie once and there's a brick, you can't do much with it. If you lie 14,000 times, you got a wall or a home. Quantity matters. And, I don't think I'm going to go through my entire life lying 22 times. That's a day's work for Trump. It's really quite phenomenal. And he gets away with it because of shamelessness. Now you're going to hear at some point over the next year, there's a split. What should the Senate or do with him? And there are going to be some Republican senators, I'm guessing, to escape the argument that you're as corrupt as he is. They'll say, well, let's split the difference. Let's censure him. We censured Joe McCarthy. And I wouldn't like that on my resume. Trump doesn't care. He will turn a censure in. You see, they couldn't impeach me. So if we flinch at what we should do, because he is going to lie about it or misstate it, that's too low a standard for us. He's going to do that in any event. Second, when you talk about lies, it's the wrong word. You know, again, hey, great-grandma, my grandchildren have one. You look great. You look terrific. Not so much. And nobody gets upset with those kind of social untruths. But he is doing something that we've never really seen. I read biographies of Lenin and Hitler to prepare for this book. I'm not saying he is Lenin or is Hitler, but each of those two men adopted the strategy of what Goebbels said: if you repeat a lie often enough, people will think it's the truth. And so Lenin would do anything for this external idea, communism. He would lie, he would kill. Hitler had an external idea and motivation: expand to the east and get the Jews. Trump does not have a compelling motive other than his own vanity. I mean, that's really vain to go through this whole thing. The editor-in-chief of the National Review, the descendant of Bill Buckley, was on a radio show with me, and he was, during the election, and he was attacking Hillary. And I said, Rick Lowry, are you telling me that Hillary is a bigger liar than Donald Trump? And he took the rug out from under my feet. He said, nobody's a bigger liar than Trump, because that's not the only issue. And I'll disagree with Ralph numerically in one way. If you say, oh, you can't convert a Trump person, that's largely true. I've tried. And with people who I regard not as racist, but they go, yeah, I hate what he does, but tax cut, he's good to Israel. Name a but. And that but overwhelms all his other pathologies. We don't have to persuade half the country. Already we have 55. In head-to-head matchups, Trump gets 40%, Democrats get 50%. Almost without exception. This thing about electability, like anyone is smart enough to know that. The four leading Democrats are all 10, 9, 8, 7 points ahead of Trump now. In other words, serendipity will decide that. All we have to do is two things to avoid a calamity. One is peel off. 46% voted for him. And a fair number of them didn't like Hillary or whatever. And a moment in time, and she was being criminally investigated by the FBI. There is a natural 40%. If we show that his impact on states are on fire and being flooded, 100,000 children were incarcerated at the border. The risk of war with Iran is higher. Real income is not up to the bottom 90%. If we can make those arguments and peel off 1/10 of his 40%, then the Democratic vote of 2016, which was 48%, would rise to 52%. And he would fall from 46% to 42%. A 10-point margin. is a landslide presidentially. And then, no one's smart enough to be a pessimist. The number of millennials, minorities, who are voting goes up every political cycle by a couple of points. And so we are cresting demographically. He's an unpopular president. Impeachment and trial will not help his popularity. And so if we chip away, not getting a third of that vote, but a tenth of the vote, plus our natural progressive majority, I'm not saying we're in good shape, but it's up to us to marshal all those assets.
One thing I just want to say, what he's doing to the Trump voters with this constellation of fabrications, like I gave you a tax cut for the masses when it was tax cut for the rich and the corporate. Like he says the air is cleaner, the water is safer. It's just the opposite. He's rolled back all kinds of deadly pollution controls, like coal ash, for example, which is a deadly pollutant. He's actually rolling back. He is aiding and abetting climate disruption. It's not that he's trying to fight it. It's not that he's doing nothing. He's actually unleashing the fossil fuels, right? So you add up this whole constellation of fabrication, and he's separating millions of his voters from reality. Do you realize how serious that is? Do you realize how serious it is in terms of their own well-being and that of their family? Did you realize how serious that is in terms of their vulnerability to a fascist demagogue who makes the next step and then the next step? So it isn't just a string of lies about what he ate for breakfast or how much he weighs or what his cholesterol is. It's about deadly serious matters that he's fantasizing and separating millions of people from the reality that they should be connected to if they want to engage in a country that they can pass on to their descendants. And that's the serious problem. And the other serious problem with Trump is he's very unstable. He's a psychiatric case. He could not pass a physical examination that covered mental health. So we have a very dangerous very dangerous, out of control person who, under real pressure, is in charge of whether our armed forces can blow up the world. And this is not just a Dr. Strangelove thing. We have here immense power in a person's hand who doesn't know anything about government in presiding. He's a 24/7 tweet machine and cable news network watcher.
How much of his actions are really just distractions? I mean, if you look at other presidents, you look at George W. Bush. I mean, arguably, George W. Bush has caused more destruction and more havoc in the world than Donald Trump is causing right now. I think for a lot of people...
Give him time.
I'm sorry?
Give him time.
Well, hopefully he won't have it, but
Correct.
If we were to say, like, for folks that are from the Middle East, I'm from that part of the world, Trump actually represents the real America. When you think of America, Trump's image comes to mind. It's brash, it's over the top, it's bullying, it's rough, it's all of that. That is America to a lot of the world. Now, Obama was an anomaly for a lot of people just by his appearance and his demeanor and all that stuff. But you can argue that George W. Bush and even Barack Obama caused more havoc in the world, even though they did it differently. They sounded a little bit more civilized in some sense, less bombastic. They didn't have a tweet machine like this guy does.
Well, you make a very truthful point. That by far the most impeachable offense in our time has been the criminal invasion of Iraq and everything that followed, Libya and Afghanistan and so on. And they're getting away with it. Nobody's going to prosecute them. They are vulnerable to criminal prosecution after they leave office, Bush and Cheney. The one good thing about Trump's narcissism is he doesn't like to start quagmire wars. Quick kills, quick drones, sure. Because he doesn't have the time for it. He's too busy controlling the news cycle. And he gets into a quagmire war, he gets distracted from his own ego. He gets distracted from controlling the news cycles in a grotesquely perverse way. We have it. However, as Mark just said, he could flip. He could completely get off a crazy rocker if he is cornered. And he knows about Wag the dog. And you never know what can happen with him. So that's why, in order to avoid deadly precedents for future presidents to be even more crazy than Bush and Cheney and so on, that's why this impeachment has got to broaden out, take more time into January, lay it all out in ways that show his immoral positions, his abuses of power on kitchen table issues, which they're not doing now in the House Judiciary Committee, and go for the removal. You can't just be satisfied with impeachment. Okay, we've done it in the House, we've done our duty.
But don't you need the Senate for the removal?
Yes.
Yes, well, how is the Senate going to come on board?
By
Just
making them defend the indefensible additional articles of impeachment. Have them defend, okay, under the category of abuse of power, which was Hamilton's standard for impeachment, high crimes and misdemeanors. Let him defend on national TV his sexual predation, his bigotry and racism, his serial lying, which offends a lot of people who are not liberals and progressives, and his incitements to violence, which I don't know any other president said, if I'm impeached or if I lose the election, there are going to be riots in the street, there's going to be civil war. That's just one cluster. Let McConnell defend that on national TV.
It sounds like he's been defending worse things. I mean, it's
But it's completely different in terms of a hearing where you have tens of millions of people under cross-examination. You have the House prosecutors. This isn't a cable interview, a soft cable interview.
So you're saying tens of millions of voters are going to be watching this and being convinced that this guy is the bad guy and need to get rid of him.
Right. And
You obviously have a lot of hope in the voters.
No, that's just one cluster. The other is bread and butter. He's frozen the minimum wage and he stated American workers are overpaid. He has refused to enforce the Labor Standards Act. He's dismantled EPA, dismantled NHTSA, the auto safety, dismantled the FAA. We have materials on the Boeing 737 MAX for anybody who wants it. He has dismantled the agencies that have been saving lives, preventing disease, and diminishing injuries. Now,
you think most Americans don't know this?
no, but it's nothing in terms of the dramatic impact. You, of all people, Andy, know the difference between a soft rendition that is not pushed sharply before a tiny audience. Look at this. How about 20, 30 million people? When it affects the viscera, it affects the emotion properly, and above all, it shows that he has turned the U.S. government over wholesale to the poison lobby and the greed lobby. And then they spell it out on national TV. That's the way they got more people on the Nixon Watergate. They got it on the Nixon. Now, Nancy Pelosi is about 50% support impeachment and removal. And she's pausing because she's waiting for 60%. Okay? Now, the Republicans impeached Clinton on far less impeachable offenses with 28% support. You see how tough these guys are? You see how they go for the jugular? They don't wishy-washy around. And that's what we've got to do in the next few days. We've got to really get on. What is the rush to judgment here? What is the rush to judgment? Why don't they work a full week? Why do they take so many recesses in the greatest constitutional crisis in American history, short of the Civil War? What's going on here? So the only thing left is personal presence. Going to the members of Congress, walking into the office, corridor by corridor, picking the Judiciary committee Democrats going to the hearings early and making a point, slow down, and go broadly with more articles of impeachment that affect people's daily lives and their sense of the future for their children.
By the way, let me
and
point
issues
out
of
that
peace.
Ralph and Joan Claybrook, who's here, today did what he just said. Walking down the corridors where you bump into people, management by, walking around, to one by one, politics hasn't, internet, direct mail. From Lincoln to today, politics at the end is personal persuasion by people you trust. It's one-on-one. And so it's not how are we going to persuade millions of people. We'll try, but a Democrat 1 and 2 cycles ago got over 50% of the vote the first time since FDR. And so it's not like we're, aiming for the stars. This is something that's extremely doable. One big challenge, though, is you said, and I'm not going to disagree with this, that numerically, George W. Bush has probably killed more people because of his Iran fixation than Trump has internationally. Let's say that's true.
Is Iraq?
Iraq.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Iraq fixation. He had an Iran fixation too, but not as much. As
Iraq.
Yeah.
Joan Claybrook has had to live with this problem. We are losing our democracy. That sounds soft. People don't wake up and say, I want my democracy back. They may say, I want my child better educated. I don't want them inhaling carcinogens. But the people they're appointing to the judiciary, the voter suppression explosion, the money in politics. I did study Germany. And after the 1960s, I developed a habit. I never called anybody a fascist because it sounded right, so knee-jerk. We are in 1929, 1931 Germany. And because Hitler was regarded as a entertaining clown that the business elites could control, but he was engaged not merely in lying, and again, that word doesn't do much for me. The word from Lenin to Trump is disinformation, and even that's not enough. It's the disassociation from reality that is happening to our own country. So Sinclair Lewis writes a book, It Can't Happen Here. Joe Conason, 40 years later, writes a book, It Can Happen Here. We could have entitled this book, It Is Happening Here.
Yeah.
And we have a combination of I don't know how to pronounce the word, it means governed by the worst, kakiastocracy. And
That was a new
monarchy.
word I learned while I was reading it.
Yeah, and if anybody's seen the movie Idiocracy, combine it with the popular show now, The Crown, that's what we have. Every time I think there can't be a worse cabinet secretary, along comes Bill Barr to disabuse me of my naivete. And let me just say in terms of being a neo-fascist, this guy is an authoritarian theocrat. He said yesterday that if black people, Black Lives Matter, keep going at it and criticizing the police, they may not have police in their neighborhoods protecting them. He's blackmailing minority communities, and he's the chief law enforcement official of the country. And today, the Inspector General's report came out that there was no hanky-panky at the start of the FBI investigation, which led to 7 Trump aides being convicted, 3 or 4 are in jail. They found there wasn't spying by Obama on Trump. Okay, here we have a not a partisan cabinet secretary, not a partisan presidential candidate, but this is why we have inspector generals. Barr's response, the inspector general is wrong. In other words, well, we all grew up thinking facts lead to conclusions. These people have conclusions that lead to facts, and they're not going to let go of this fantasy, no matter how many inspector generals. Now, I will not embarrass anybody. Ralph, don't raise your hand. I always do this with audiences because I like to see where we are. There are 4.5 candidates who could be the Democratic nominee. I'm going to ask you simply to raise your hand if you today would vote for one of these 4.5. Bernie Sanders. Elizabeth Warren. Okay, so 6 versus 10, 12. Pete Buttigieg. Hey, this is not official. You know that. Okay, 1. Joe Biden. 2. And finally, my good friend, I'm responsible for Mike Bloomberg's candidacy. I am. I ran for mayor in 2001. I was 20 points ahead of Bloomberg. I didn't coast, you never know. And then things happened. And $95 a vote buys you stuff. And he wins by 2 points. What are you going to do? He now understandably thinks, oh, I did it before. I'll spend $1 to $2 billion. Don't let him give you a little leg and say, oh, I'm going to spend 50 million, 100 million. Get ready for the first $2 billion primary. And it's impossible to know exactly what I don't think it's going to succeed. But he can't unlearn the lesson he learned about me. And so I formally want to apologize to Busboys and Poets and everybody who came here for his candidacy. Raise your hand, and I'm watching. Who's for Mike Bloomberg? Okay, 2.
Three people.
3.
I think some people voted twice. That's what I noticed.
Okay, let me give the scene this week in Congress. And it's going to be an optimistic one with one exception. The House Judiciary Committee freshmen, because they will have to defend Ukraine, and Trump will zero in on them like a laser beam. And they won't have to be able to say, yes, but it's your health care, it's your labor, it's your wages, it's your kids' clean air and clean water, it's the schools that aren't being rebuilt while he's spending billions more than the generals want in the Pentagon, on and on and on.
But Ralph, I think also she understands the American voter. Their attention span is not that deep, and they're not going to be putting up with every single day for the next umpteen months listening to impeachments. They're going to start saying that what is the Congress doing? They're doing nothing but focusing on impeachment. She wants to get a simple bite-sized piece to say, okay, we impeached him and move on.
Yeah, but move on means he stays in power.
Well, he's going to stay in power, I think, either way. I mean, we can disagree on that.
No,
but.
I think you're prejudging.
Okay.
I think you don't know the power of congressional hearings under cross-examination.
But also the power of the media that is supporting him, and the power of the billionaires who are supporting him, which you outlined.
But they're salivating details. That's the point with Trump. He's not a dull politician. He provokes emotion. He provokes interest. He provokes talk at the water cooler because of all the things that he's done.
So are we heading to? I mean, has he exposed a serious vulnerability in our democracy?
Totally.
So this is basically a constitutional crisis we're facing.
Yes. I mean, Ralph hasn't yet mentioned that. How are they going to defend a sexual predator, a racist, etc.? And they have arguments. How are they going to defend that Don McGahn, his own lawyer, testified under oath before the Mueller investigation, that Trump told him to lie about the fact that Trump ordered McGahn to fire Mueller? That's per se obstruction of justice. And so you're saying, you're positing, oh God, it can't just be Ukraine, because if it is, he'll then find out, he'll have something on the president of the Ukraine. He'll find something that Ukraine did 20 years ago. He'll make up one thing. If all your eggs are in one basket, then he can marshal all his forces. Lee and Grant never had, until the very end, an army-on-army battle. They always understood they have to flank, they have to have some in reserve. You don't put, and Washington didn't have one major battle for 7 years until the end, because he was ridiculed as the great delayer, because he understood. So it's not umpteen months, please. I understand it's an election year and you can't go umpteen months, but don't give up hope. I mean, Ralph today was lobbying on just this issue. Nancy Pelosi changed her mind. It's not easy to do this. She said no impeachment of George W. Bush, and she got her way. She said no impeachment of Trump, even though he's a thug. And then Ukraine made her cross over and say yes. It's a big decision. Could she now, because of the popularity of a larger number of articles, or more counts in an article, include obstruction of justice, obstruction of Congress, abuse of power, Ukraine, and that would be something. Because he can't, I would be happy if he were impeached just by what he's admitted. He admitted obstruction of Congress. Don't cooperate at all.
He's the best self-impeacher that the White House ever had. He
admitted-
feeds it every day. There are going to be a lot more shoes dropping. You don't want to cut it off in a week or two. And then you send it to McConnell. McConnell says, well, all these things that happened afterwards, Speaker Pelosi, they don't count because they weren't in your articles of impeachment that you voted on. Why wouldn't you wait? Already whistleblowers are coming out. More and more people, more and more evidence is coming out. And he will become more maniacal the longer the suspense continues about his impeachment. He will start going more and more extreme, if that's possible, and feeding this image of his as totally unfit to remain in the White House. So with Nancy Pelosi, you got to persuade her on two things: that those 12 freshmen can be reelected with a much broader television exposed articles of impeachment. And the second thing is the polls get to 60%, she's on our side. And so that becomes like a catch-22.
Those members, those 12 freshmen, many of them women, many of them veterans, did an op-ed in the Washington Post 6 weeks ago saying impeach the SOB. And they were the ones that were theoretically being protected. And Pelosi has said when she read their op-ed and realized, so she acted in that sense, not as a Sam Rayburn, just this is it. But she saw that her caucus was moving in a certain direction, and she couldn't use them as an excuse because they said go ahead. So now, well, some of those vulnerable people push her toward not one but 4 articles, and we'll know in 3 days.
And we're very upset with the Democrats in the House, I am, because they've excluded the civic groups from being part of this multi-month discussion up there. As a result, they're not getting the benefit of our experience, gone through a lot of impeachments, a lot of other things. But most important, they have stripped us of the ability to get media. Thank goodness Real News is here from Baltimore. They've stripped us from getting media to get to the millions of people who support all these groups in Washington in order to increase the polls. So it's like a catch-22. You've got to broaden the impeachment hearings to show how horrible this man is and what he's capable of in order to get the polls up. And if you get the polls up, there's no disagreement with Nancy Pelosi.
It seems to me, if you don't know how horrible this man is already, you either have your head in the sand somewhere, or you just, just basing all of your decisions on pure racism. because he certainly knows how to do that. But this book really outlines some of those lies and misinformations and gaslighting that he's done over the years. I know that Mark has to be catching a train not very long from now. I wanted to have a chance for at least a couple questions from the audience, if you don't mind. Can we do that?
Sure.
Yeah. So let me give you the microphone. Let me give you this one because this is a walk-around microphone. So please make your comment short and sweet.
Remember, question, not comment. He meant question. One sec, I'll be back.
Yeah. Hi, this is for anyone that's on the stage, and my question is, how are you going to get 67 votes in the Senate to remove him? Because a lot of these folks voted to go forward with impeachment, initial impeachment investigation because they thought it would be narrow in scope. So if we're widening the scope, how are you going to get 67 folks to remove him?
Well, some of the 53 Republicans may say, I'll go along with Trump on Ukraine. My constituents they don't eat Ukraine for breakfast. And it doesn't affect their families, no big deal. But they may be offended by telling lawyers to lie to a law enforcement process, by some of the other things Ralph has said. Now, on the one hand, Nixon couldn't be impeached until he was. There, it was simple. There was no Fox, and he was on tape. His voice was on tape. Today, there's a Fox that is poisoning the country and Trump. Let me recommend a book above ours. A woman who you've never heard of has written a small book and made a little film about it. It's called What Happened to Dad? Go online, you can see it. Whatever Happened to Dad? And she reports her family were moderate Democrats, her father liked JFK, and suddenly a few years later he's saying to her, oh, you're just like those feminazis, all those liberals, those retards. She said, Dad, what are you doing? Turns out he was driving an hour to and from work every day, and it was a barren area, radio-wise, except for Hannity and Limbaugh, and it just completely brainwashed him.
It's an amazing film. I totally agree with you. John, I told you about it.
I can't hear you?
It's a great film and a wonderful story.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So we have time maybe
One
for,
more.
we have time for one or two more
I think we got
questions
one.
really quick, and then we want to do a signing before.
So I'm a political, minded person.
Please set up the table, please, and then get the signing right away. Thank you.
Unlike 90% of the, let's say 90% of the country, I watched the impeachment hearings today. I still don't understand why the Republicans were talking constantly about Adam Schiff being should have been there where Mark Goldman was. Still don't know because the Democrats didn't explain it. Not only that, there's 24 Democrats on that committee. That's 120 minutes, and they asked no questions of value.
The Democrats asked no questions about what?
Well, I mean, it was just all they did was repeat the whole time, and they had that's 2 hours of questions that they wasted the whole time.
Well,
how are you going to get an impeachment?
I watched some of it because I was traveling. Repetition works.
Exactly.
Wait a second. I want to add to that. Repetition works. And in advertising, sophisticated advertisers know unless your product's name gets in front of a potential consumer 7 times, they don't hear anything. But you have to repeat almost ad nauseum. For the Democrats to take up the argument about why Adam Schiff, who certainly had his camera time and did spectacularly with it, wasn't cross-examining some witness, it is such small potatoes. What they did is they kept repeating, Trump admitted he wanted the Ukraine to investigate the Bidens. That's per se impeachable. Then Then it's been shown he did it in an exchange for military aid, which is a double impeachment. And so you just got a lot of people, that hasn't sunk in yet. And so remember the Goebbels line, that repetition works. I remember I was in 1962, as a college senior, Adlai Stevenson came to Cornell. I was so excited, and I heard him speak, and I gathered around him. 2 years later, I'm in New York City, and he's giving a speech, and I go. I was shocked. He gave the same speech. The point is not to be original, but to be repetitively right. And so I think you're being too hard on the Democrats. They did pretty damn well in the two committees so far. And now we'll see what's in the pudding.
The importance of Ukraine is that if you don't remove him from office, he will interfere with foreign efforts in the election. He'll interfere the election by suppressing vote here, we know that, in all kinds of ways. And he'll do it. He said he wanted help from China, he wanted help from Russia. See, he doubles down. He doesn't back off with shame, say, boy, that was a close call. You know, I better not do any more of that. So that's another significance to the Ukraine issue. And the reason they repeat is because the Republicans keep repeating. They keep saying, it didn't happen, as if attempt is not a crime, right? So they keep repeating because the Republicans keep repeating.
Well, this is the neo-fascist point, and then I'll stop. If he's not removed, then the odds are against it. But remember, Nixon wasn't going to be removed, and then the dam broke. It's harder now, but it's conceivable. If he's not removed, he will know, and all future presidents will know, they can do anything lawless, 1930 Germany, etc. And the only accountability they have is if their party gets less than a third of the vote in the Senate. That's the only check. If impeachment is done away with, which it would be if they don't go after him on this. And so in my mind, it is re-election or realignment. There's a natural progressive majority in this country on issue after issue, which the media don't reflect, etc. And if it clicks in a year because of Trump's infidelities, personal and public, it may not be a 52-42 win, it could be bigger. And then we have the next president, bear with me, being potentially a 21st century FDR, what FDR was to Hoover, a complete flip of the paradigm, and a brand new government and vision. That could happen, but if he's not impeached and reelected, then he has absolutely no inhibition. I don't know of any. And then we're getting close to a takeover by the Bill Barrs of the country, or worse.